How do we view something that is exponentially larger, greater than we are? Poet named John Gottfried Sachs popularized a parable about 6 Indian men who were introduced to an elephant. The catch is they were all blind men. So they were introduced and brought to this elephant, and they each began feeling and touching in order to see what an elephant is. So the first man walked up to the side, the belly of the elephant, and he felt around and he touched, and he never really felt it change. So he spoke up and said, well, an elephant is like a wall. Second gentleman was up toward the front, and he felt the tusks of the elephant, and he said, well, an elephant is like a spear. The third one had felt the trunk, and so he said the elephant must be a lot like a snake. The fourth had ended up at his legs, and he couldn't reach his arms around the legs, so he said an elephant is like a tree. The fifth had ended up near the ears, and he was feeling of how pliable they were and thin they were. And he said, well, an elephant is like a fan. And the final one was at its backside, and he felt the tail. And he said, well, an elephant is a lot like a rope. None of them were wrong. But to base their view of the entire elephant based on the one section that they had experienced would be highly misguided. Think of the final one. Not only would it be misguided and inaccurate, but think of the consequence. If the final one had felt the elephant's tail and said, well, an elephant's like a rope. What if in a future time he's told, you're next to an elephant, and all he thinks of it as is as a rope? He's quick to be trampled or gored without knowing it because he underestimated the whole, because he was only familiar with one single quality. We recognize and must recognize that God is far too great for us to view him as only one quality or attribute. He is the sum of limitless qualities and attributes, all of which not only powerful but also compassionate and loving toward us. We must keep remembering this truth because how we view him will always impact how we approach him, how we seek to please him. There's an author named A.W. Tozer wrote a book in 1961 that we'll reference in a latter point in just a moment. But in the opening part of the first chapter, he says, if you ask this question of any person, what comes into your mind when you think about God? If you ask that question of any person and you get a full, deep, honest answer, that his or her life will then be extremely predictable based on how they view God. And he then says, likewise, you take any leader or teacher in the church and you ask them, what comes into your mind when you think about God? You can do the same for your home. You can do the same for your marriage. And to get a full, deep, honest answer then becomes extremely predictable about the outcomes of that church, of that home, of that relationship. How we view God will always dictate and impact how we serve and please him. This morning we're going to approach this task of trying to see him as the collection and the combination of attributes from the chapter of Isaiah 40. It's a very pivotal chapter in the book. It's easy to remember how the book of Isaiah is broken down because it's similar to our Bibles. 1 through 39, essentially, chapters 1 through 39, are the warnings about the impending persecution, but especially the captivity that the Babylonians would come in and apply to the Jews. They would come in and take them back to Babylon. So 1 through 39, warnings, you've left God for far too long, you've been rebellious in your hearts, you're going to be taken captive. Well, there's a change in chapter 40 through 66. The last 27 chapters are Isaiah still prophesying before the captivity ever takes place, but saying, you do have a future. You do have hope in God. And so he's talking 100 years or so before the people who experience chapter 40 experience it. But those words are given as hope for those who will be taken captive. It's given as hope as those who will be raised in captivity. It's given as hope for those who will be allowed to come back from captivity. And what we want to notice this morning is that all those emotions and tension that would have been felt from their time in captivity and the destruction that caused it, God wants them to view himself, his being, and his attributes as the source of their comfort and their future hope. That God is the answer to questions that they previously would have thought as unanswerable. Notice how the chapter begins. Comfort, comfort my people, says your God. They needed comfort. Why? Because they had just witnessed decades of destruction from a wicked nation. And they knew it was because of their own nation's rebellion. Verse 2, speak tenderly to Jerusalem, tenderly. Cry to her that her warfare has ended, that her iniquity is pardoned, she has received from the Lord's hand double from all her sins. She suffered, and she suffered mightily, so that God would wake them up and they would turn to him. I have a friend that preaches at the Mount Juliet congregation in Tennessee, Craig Evans, a good West Tennessee Southern boy, loves to fish, loves to play guitar, country music, all that. He was mentioning Isaiah 40 a few months ago, and he said that this chapter begins God's after whooping talk. They've had to endure a bit of correction, painful correction. What he grew up hearing called a whooping, what you may remember as a whooping. And they had to endure that pain. But now chapter 40 sets in, and he's recognizing they need to be hugged. They need to be embraced and told, I still love you. No matter the pain you've experienced from rebelling against me, you still have to know that I love you. So it's a tender tone, but it's coming off of them having experienced some pain because they had rejected God. Now, what he's going to do in the heart of the chapter, he opens with comfort, verses 1 and 2. You'll see beginning in verse 3, words that are descriptive of John the Baptist's ministry. Those are quoted in Matthew and in Luke's gospel, verses 3 through 10 or so. But notice that beginning in verse 11 and 12, there's going to be an appeal to other aspects of the world for the sake of saying God is far, far greater than these. And the takeaway must be this, that we'll never find true comfort in the natural world. It may inspire us, it may give us a boost, but it'll never actually comfort us. We'll never find comfort in the nations of the world, and we'll never find comfort in the world's idols. Notice quickly how he's going to do this. He's going to talk about the natural world. He's going to talk about how God is the source of all the wisdom that's in the world, but you cannot find it only in the natural world apart from God. Then he gets strong language when he talks about the nations of the world. Think about how important this is in the context. Mighty Babylon has destroyed Jerusalem, taken them captive. The mighty Persians come in and destroy Babylon 70 years later. So you've got mighty and then mightier than mighty. And they've witnessed it firsthand. And then now listen to how God describes the nations. Behold, the nations are like a drop from a bucket, and are accounted as the dust on the scales. They're accounted by him as less than nothing and emptiness. I got 2 buckets, 2 5-gallon buckets right now out on my patio area. One of them is largely empty, but it doesn't stay empty when it rains. I got another bucket that's almost full, and it's full of ashes from the wood that I've used to smoke food on or food with. I cannot imagine thinking of these buckets and trying to track a single drop of water from the bucket full of rainwater. I cannot imagine trying to track a single ash from the other bucket. God sees the nations. He knows the nations. But also think of the scale. To God, the nations are but a single drop of water. To God, the nations are but a single bit of dust or ash. They are less than nothing. He uses the imagery of dust on the scale. So you imagine taking a scale that measures weight and putting dust on it. It doesn't register. It's just dust. That's how God views the nations. And God's greatness is far superior to that of the nations. But then when you take the natural world and you take the nations living within that world, what do? They begin to take their values and they look to the natural world to explain it, and they begin to create idols. So anything that a nation or a group of peoples or a culture creates as an idol, God is still far superior as. And we need to pause and see with great reverence why this is important. When we get to the latter section, our point of emphasis about the nature of God, we must see this as a strong correction against our attempts to make our own idols. Listen to God's rebuke. If I'm talking this past week and studying this chapter, this verse 20 is the most corrective verse for me. When I want to know why I don't wait on the Lord, verse 31, I need to look first to see, am I doing what verse 20 says first? It's not just stepping on my toes, it's crushing them. Listen to his logic in verse 20. He who is too impoverished for an offering chooses wood that will not rot. He seeks out a skillful craftsman to set up an idol that does not move. So he says, what he's saying in this beautiful poetic form is that you'll find people who claim they don't have the time, or in this case, the money. Maybe they think they don't have the skill. They don't have the opportunities to serve God or to fulfill their commitments to God. I'm too busy. I don't have the time. I don't have the money. I'm too poor. I'm not skilled enough. All those excuses, right? What does that person then do? He turns around and he picks the best possible wood. I can't just choose any wood to be made into this statue. If I choose a piece of wood that will rot, it won't last. So you see the contrast already? I don't have the money or the time or the energy to serve the God who created everything, but I do have, and I do make the time and the energy and the money to go find the best possible wood to make this idol. But then I don't make the idol myself. I'm not very skilled. I've got to pay someone to craft this in the image of something from the natural world. So he pays a skilled craftsman. And can you imagine a skilled craftsman not charging anything? No, he's going to charge a lot. And he's not going to cover the idol in an alloy, in a fake metal. He's going to cover it in the best of metals, in gold and in silver. So you see the strong rebuke that comes by way of contrast? Look at what you won't give up for the true God. And look at what you do spare no expense for. The things that fulfill your desires, the things that represent your values, you go above and beyond for. And then notice the takeaway in verse 20. That will not move. The only way an idol changes locations is if the person who made it or who possesses it moves it. You go to no expense spared for something that can only have life when you give it life. How does an idol that's lifeless give comfort? How does an idol that's lifeless, how does it deliver? How does an idol that's lifeless tell you where you came from or tell you where you're going? How does an idol that's lifeless prepare you for a difficult future? How can an idol that's lifeless lift you up when it depends on you to lift it up? So as we move forward, thinking about the nature of God, the attributes of God, we must see Him in strong contrast and in even rebuking our own man-made and head-made idols. That same author we referenced at the opening, A.W. Tozer, he says this: a God begotten in the shadows of a fallen heart will quite naturally be no true likeness of the true God. Not only would our own self-conceived descriptions of God be inaccurate, they're going to be highly consequential because they don't reflect the truth of who God is. And that's consequential because the gospel is based on the very heart of God. Until we see the holiness of God and how our sin robs God of His holiness, it offends His holiness, were not receptive to the gospel of Jesus Christ and the sacrifice that he had to make. So the conclusion that Tozer then makes is that low views of God destroy the gospel itself for all who hold them. As long as we view God as simply this or that, and in a way that I can put him in a box, and that I can easily and quickly access him, but he doesn't interfere with my own life, I now limit myself to be able to understand his love for me in Jesus Christ, my Savior. That's why how we view God in his totality is so crucial. Let's fast forward to the end of the chapter. We'll go to verse 27. You'll notice the format is, and it's even begun earlier than this, but the format over and over again is a rhetorical question, perhaps one that the Israelites were asking, or the Jews were asking, and it's specifically answered by God. There's some tension addressed in the questions, and then God is the answer to those questions. It's similar to Job when God confronts Job in the whirlwind. So let's look at verse number 27. Why do you say, O Jacob, and speak, O Israel, here he's quoting them, my way is hidden from the Lord, my right is disregarded by my God. Why would you say those things about God? That's the question. And if we pull that verse out and we say, well, why are these people so discouraged? We could find some reasons that might explain their discouragement, right? They've seen their forefathers be so rebellious and idolatrous against God. They've seen these mighty nations come down and destroy them, kill their children, destroy their temple. They've seen a lot of things that would have caused them heartache and despair, and even begin to question, is God there for me? So likewise this morning, every one of us here has experienced some things that we would say, that's really, really difficult. Why has God allowed that to happen? Why does this continue to happen? I think we can find some overlap with their despair. But Isaiah's message, even before they experience it by way of prophecy, Isaiah's message is, why do you keep on saying it when you know you have an answer? So here's the answer. Verse 28. Have you not known? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He does not faint or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable. He answers with truth about the nature of God. So when we dive in and we begin to increase our knowledge of the attributes of God, and we see them as a whole working together, we are better positioned to accept his comfort, to be able to move forward through struggles and difficulties and trials, even more so than we could ever imagine. So notice, first of all, the message to them, the message to us, is that you are not alone in your struggles, because God is by nature ever present. He is omnipresent. Look at verse 28, the second line of that verse. The Lord is the everlasting God. When we say God is omniscient, we mean that God is present everywhere. He is present everywhere at all times with all the fullness of his being. He is spirit, and he created the physical world, and he created time. So not only is he above time and above space, and he transcends them, he is present across time and space. There's no time that we could escape to and not be with God. There's no place we could go to and not be with God. David would famously say, verse 7 of Psalm 139, where shall I go from your spirit? Where shall I flee from your presence? If I go as high as I can into heaven, there you are. If I make my bed in Sheol, the realm of the dead, the pit, as far deep into the earth as I can go, you are there. I cannot escape. That's also a beautiful promise, that I cannot be beyond God's presence. Solomon would say when he was dedicating the temple, 1 Kings 8, verse 27, behold, heaven and the highest heaven. I go through the sky, and then I go even further, the highest heaven. However high I can go, they cannot contain you. Therefore, how much less this house that I've built. While the point of the temple may have been for it to have been a place for God's presence to be among his people, Solomon understood there was no way we could ever contain the presence of God. That just because God's presence was more directly in the Holy of Holies did not mean he was not present everywhere. That's the message these Jews needed to remember, that God had never left them when they went into captivity. God had never fully left them when their forefathers had rebelled, because God is always present. So he's talked about this throughout the chapter. Verse 11, he will tend his flock like a shepherd. He will gather the lambs in his arms. He will carry them in his bosom and gently lead those that are with young. A few verses later, verse 22, it is he who sits above the circle of the earth. Its inhabitants are like grasshoppers. I love the dynamic that you see in both of these together. God is so big, he's everywhere. He's on the circle of the earth. He looks down. He can see all, and we're all like little grasshoppers. But also notice the nearness of his ever-presence. He's like a shepherd walking beside us and leading us and holding us and protecting us. You've been through a lot. You're still going to face a lot. You've got a lot of waiting to do, but you must know God is with you. Second, you'll also have the strength that you need because God is all-powerful. Look at the next clauses in verse number 28. The creator of the ends of the earth. That's a description of God. He does not faint or grow weary. God possesses all power. He can do whatever is subject to power, strength, ability. If it demands those qualities, he can do it. And there's no limit to his power at all to do anything that is possible. If it can be done, God has the power to do it. Job and his recollections and his revelations about God himself near the end of that book. I know that you can do all things, that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. Jeremiah chapter 32, verse 27, behold, I am the Lord, the God of all flesh. Is anything too hard for me? Rhetorically, no, of course not. Nothing is too difficult for God. And the angel would tell Mary, upon her receiving this news about being with child, with Jesus, comforts her, encourages her, builds her up by saying nothing will be impossible with God. And these Jews needed to remember this same message. They had been victimized by the most powerful world empire of the time, the Babylonians. They knew power. They also saw that power of the most powerful king, one of the most evil kings in history, Nebuchadnezzar. They had seen that power addressed by God during his reign. Nebuchadnezzar was humbled by the power of God. They saw another kingdom, the Persians, come in and show even more power. In the arrogance of the Babylonians, the Persians came in and conquered them. These Jews were familiar one-to-one with power. And yet they needed to know that the power of those nations was no match for the power of God. Likewise, in chapter 40, verse 10, the Lord comes with might. His arm rules for him. Behold, his reward is with him, and his recompense before him. He comes with power, but he also comes rewarding those who trust his power. He comes taking vengeance on those who rebel against his power. He is the God of all power. Verse 12, this is from the New Living Translation. Who else has held the oceans in his hand? Who has measured off the heavens with his fingers? Who else knows the weight of the earth or has weighed the mountains and hills on a scale? God created all things, and his power reflects just how minute we are and his creation is. Verse 26 is the verse right before we began reading verse 27. Listen to how this appeals to God's power. Instead of looking up to the nations, instead of looking to the idols for comfort, instead of looking up to nature in an empty way, look with awe at the stars. Lift up your eyes on high and see. Who created all of these? He who brings out their host by number, calling them all by name, by the greatness of his might, And because he is strong in power, not one is missing. So think a couple of different images in your mind at the same time. Think about elementary school and how a kindergarten class or first grade class, second grade, whoever, when you leave the classroom, you go in a line, right? You're going to the restroom break, you're going to the cafeteria to eat lunch, you're going to the library, you line up, and you line up by last name, or you line up by first name, or however it is that you line up. And the teacher checks attendance by how you line up. Think of how sometimes that can be a chore, just getting young children to fall in line. Now go outside at night. Snap a picture of just a small portion of the sky with your phone. And you begin to try to count the stars in that one little section of the sky. How hard is it to track? Oh, did I count that one or did I not? Is that a star or is that not? The idea is God is so powerful. He calls the stars by name, and they can just line up by number and by name, and he doesn't leave one out. They're all under his control. We do not even know how many there are. And Isaiah is saying he can just get them to fall right in line, and they do as he wills. That's the God that gives you strength. It's the God who has all power, such to line up the stars of the universe. But number 3, notice the end of verse 28. You are known and you're cared for because God is, in fact, all-knowing. He is omniscient. Final clause of verse 28, his understanding is unsearchable. We cannot find a limit to his understanding. He knows everything that is possible to know. Therefore, he knows you. And perhaps maybe we struggle with this just like they would have. They would have heard his understanding is unsearchable, and perhaps some of them would have been a little ashamed over their forefathers, or maybe even ashamed of their own actions, their own hard-heartedness. But God knew them, and he knew everything about them, and he was still offering them ways to come back to him. He was still showing them, I will deliver you and I will protect you. So God's omniscience is so powerful in our lives as it was for them, because he knows everything about us, even the things we hope no one else ever finds out, and he still loves us just the same. So David, in talking to his son Solomon, the Lord searches all hearts and understands every plan and thought. Paul would come to this conclusion, Romans 11:33. Oh, the depth of the riches and the wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable are his judgments, how inscrutable, how unchanging, how unquestionable are his ways. He knows all, and all that he knows is the best. All that he is the best. The Israelites, the Jews, needed to know God knows. And all that he knows, he's going to make known for you his will and his goodness toward you. So look at verse 13. Who has measured the Spirit of the Lord? What man shows him his counsel? Whom did he consult? Who made him understand? Who taught him the path of justice, taught him knowledge, and showed him the way of understanding? No one told God these things. No one surprised God with what was happening to them. God knew. And God's still acting with care and compassion, even though he knows everything. And that's a helpful way. It's a deep concept, but it's still a helpful way to wrestle with what gets positioned as some tension sometimes, or even a contradiction by some. They might say, well, if God knows everything about the future, then do we not have a choice? Is everything pre-decided? Notice the context of this chapter and where we're going here at the end of the chapter. Those who wait on the Lord. God knows all, and yet we still have 100% full choice about whether or not to trust him. His omniscience is not contradicted by our free will. We know that he knows. We know that he knows the future. And yet we still are 100% in control of whether or not we will trust him and wait on him. So that's the final plea for us this morning, is in light of God's omnipresence and omnipotence and omniscience, he is always worth waiting for. So let's read together beginning of verse 29. He gives power to the faint. To him who has no might, he increases strength. Even youth shall faint and be weary, young men shall fall exhausted. Verse 30 means even the best and the brightest and the most fit will eventually wear out. But in contrast, verse 31, but they who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. So his knowledge means that he always knows. He's always aware of our circumstances, of our emotions, of our fears. And because he is present, that means he's always extending and giving us his power that we might endure. Look at the word pictures he then gives. To wait on the Lord is to trust in him. And so the takeaway is this all-powerful being gives you his power to wait, to trust in him. You'll renew your strength. When you feel like your strength is beginning to wane and you don't have much more to give, God will keep giving you strength to endure. You'll rise up on wings like that of eagles or birds of prey. And just think of the difference. The difference in being a small bird versus a bird of the heavens, a bird of prey. You're not living in fear as though you're prey of other animals. You are rising above. You have strength to be far transcendent over the circumstances and over the nations of this earth because God is himself. You can run. You'll never tire. You'll know the best endurance runners on the face of the earth always have to take breaks. They always rest and recover after their races. The takeaway is you'll be like a runner who never has the break because God gives you strength. You can walk and you'll never faint. You can go up hills, you can hike dangerous climbs, and God will keep giving you strength to not faint. I have to wonder if part of the inclusion here about running and walking is not tied to the fact that they're going to be making this trek from 900 miles north back down to Jerusalem. God's going to give them everything they need to return back home. And the takeaway from this section about waiting on the Lord must be that waiting is not inactive. It's not passive. Waiting is always an active response to God's character. So we think about this era of the deportation, the captivity. You've got generations that are raised in Babylon and who live in Babylon. And we could call out 6 names from 2 different books of the Old Testament: Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, Mordecai, Esther. They're all examples of people who waited on the Lord during this era. As far as we know, none of the 6 of them ever went back to Jerusalem. But they waited on the Lord. Notice how active their waiting was. They lived lives of holiness and purity, of wisdom and discernment, boldness, courage, habits and routines that were godly, risk, trust. They're all very active as they waited on the Lord. Therefore, as we see the takeaway here, we see how wonderful God is in all of his attributes. And we know that that now gives us the comfort and the boldness to then act with faithfulness for him and with him. It's the same point that Paul's going to make about his own life in the New Testament. And I have to wonder even if, is Isaiah 40:31 one of the verses that Paul has learned about as a Jew growing up, and then now he sees the fulfillment of Christ, and he begins to think, hey, this is what God's been promising all along, and look at now the fullness of what we get in Jesus. Waiting on the Lord is not waiting for God to eliminate all of our problems or our pain. Waiting on the Lord is being actively faithful no matter the problems or the pain. That's what Paul would say in response to this thorn in the flesh discussion. God never removed the thorn, but he did say, my grace is sufficient for you, my power is made perfect in weakness. Paul would say in every circumstance, I've learned the secret. The secret for Paul was verse 13, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. These Jews learned the secret for how to endure captivity, how to endure a wicked nation, how to endure paganism, how to endure a 900-mile trek, how to endure rebuilding the temple and rebuilding the city and rebuilding its walls. God was the one who would give them strength. As we close, just go back over the first 3 points that we made. What are the promises? You're not alone. You have the strength that you need. You're known and you're cared for. How often might we see those on a meme or an image online? How often do we see those monetized and marketed, sold? Think of how much money the therapeutic industry makes on trying to convince people of these three promises. They are true when we receive them from the one who designed us and made us. These are longings in the heart of every single human being. And what Isaiah 40 reminds us of is that God, by his very nature and existence, meets our deepest longings. We are never alone because he's omnipresent. We are never without power or strength because he is omnipotent. And we're never forgotten. We're known and we're cared for because of his omniscience. If you need to begin your walk with him, a walk of fulfillment, begin that today. Choose to obey his son, Jesus Christ, in baptism for the forgiveness of your sins. Do that this morning. Maybe you need to come back to him. You've not been waiting on the Lord and trusting in him. You can come back to him this morning as well. If you have any other burden or need that we can help you with, would you come as we sing together?